The twin suns of Rukter bled crimson across the broken horizon, painting the dust storms the color of old blood. High above the labor canyons, the Veyra spires rose like black needles, their anti-grav platforms humming with the low, satisfied growl of conquerors. Down below, in the heat shimmer and the stink of scorched metal, the humans worked. Kael Dane wiped sweat from his eyes with a forearm already raw from plasma burns. 29 years old, born in the holds of the Exodus Ark Mercy's wake, he had never seen Earth. Only stories. Only the promise that somewhere, far behind the dark, there had once been blue oceans and green fields and a sky that didn't try to cook you alive. He knelt beside a ruptured coolant manifold the size of a city bus, fingers moving with the calm certainty of a man who had rebuilt engines since he could walk. The manifold fed the colony's primary atmospheric processor. If it failed, the air turned to acid in 12 hours. Everyone, human and Veyra alike, would choke on their own lungs. A Veyra overseer loomed behind him, 8 feet of chitin and arrogance, neural whip crackling violet at his side. Terran, the creature hissed through translated vocoder, voice like grinding glass. The Primarch demands the processor restored before the night wind. Fail, and your chain mates feed the furnaces. Kael didn't look up. Tell the Primarch the laws of thermodynamics don't negotiate with deadlines. The whip cracked an inch from his ear, close enough that the ozone stung. Kael's shoulders tensed, but his hands stayed steady. He had learned long ago that flinching only entertained them. Around him, the other slaves, 200 humans in scarred gray jumpsuits, kept their heads down, moving parts, hauling cable, pretending they couldn't hear the exchange. But Kael felt their attention like a held breath. He pried open the manifold's inspection plate. Inside, coolant lines had flash frozen and shattered from a pressure surge no one had bothered to warn them about. Typical Veyra maintenance. Conquer first, read the manual never. Kael's mind raced through the numbers. Flow rates, heat transfer coefficients, the tensile strength of the emergency bypass patches they weren't supposed to have. The Veyra thought humans were strong backs and weak minds. They had never bothered to learn what an engineer could do when death was the only alternative to success. He pulled a coil of scavenged superconductor from his tool satchel, stolen months ago from a wrecked patrol skiff, hidden inside the lining of his bunk. The overseer's mandibles clicked in suspicion. That is not sanctioned material, Terran. It's what keeps you breathing, Kael said quietly. Your choice. Silence stretched, broken only by the moan of wind through the canyon. The overseer's whip wavered. Even the Veyra knew the processor was minutes from catastrophic failure. Arrogance warred with survival. Survival won. The whip lowered. Kael worked. His fingers bled where the superconductor's edges cut, but he braided it into a makeshift cryoloop, rerouting the flow around the ruptured section. Every motion was precise, reverent almost, the way his mother had taught him to pray with tools instead of words. Behind him, a little girl no older than 10 Mara from the children's barracks slipped through the legs of the guards with a canteen of water she wasn't supposed to have. She pressed it into his hand without a word. Their eyes met for half a second. Hers were ancient. His were on fire. He drank, handed it back, and kept working. Deep in the manifold, frost began to creep along the new bypass. Pressure gauges twitched, then steadied. The death rattle of the processor quieted to a low, healthy thrum. Kael sat back on his heels, chest heaving. The twin suns touched the horizon, and for one impossible moment the sky looked almost gentle. The overseer stared at the readouts, compound eyes reflecting green. Then slowly he did something no human had ever seen a Veyra do. He stepped back, not in fear, something else. Awe perhaps, or the first flicker of doubt. Kael stood, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit. 200 human faces watched him from the shadows of the canyon. No one cheered. They didn't dare, but something passed between them like a current, invisible and electric. The overseer's vocoder crackled. The Primarch will wish to speak with you, Terran. Kael met the alien's gaze without flinching. Tell him I'll be there after I check the secondary filters, unless he wants to explain to his warriors why their air tastes like rust tomorrow. For a long moment the canyon was silent except for the wind. Then the overseer turned and walked away, neural whip dangling forgotten at his side. Kael looked up at the spires piercing the bleeding sky. Somewhere inside those black towers, the Veyra Primarch was learning that some chains were forged in the wrong direction. Night wind began to rise, cold and sharp as judgment. Kael closed his eyes for the length of one breath and felt the old words his mother had whispered in the dark of the Ark. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, he opened his eyes. The humans around him were already moving, quiet, purposeful, passing tools hand to hand like communion. In the gathering dark, beneath alien stars that had never known human songs, Kael Dane smiled for the first time in years. And somewhere in the high spires, the Veyra began to feel the first tremor of something they had no word for reverence. The lift to the upper spires took 7 minutes. 7 minutes of silence inside a cage of black glass and humming grav plates, flanked by 2 Veyra honor guards whose claws never left the hilts of their plasma lances. Kael stood between them, wrists still raw from the day's work, blood crusted under broken fingernails. He smelled of coolant, sweat, and the metallic tang of fear he refused to give a name. The city above the canyons was a different world. Where the labor pits baked under open sky, the spires floated in permanent twilight, cooled by engineered winds and lit by bioluminescent vines that crawled across every surface like living scripture. The air tasted clean, too clean, like it had been scrubbed of the right to be dirty. The lift doors slid open onto the Primarch's observatory, a circular chamber 200 meters across, its transparent dome revealing the full fury of Rukter's night sky, 2 moons, 1,000 unfamiliar constellations, and the faint silver thread of the Exodus fleet's graveyard orbiting far above. Primarch Veyra waited at the center, taller than any warrior Kael had seen, carapace lacquered obsidian and gold. His forearms were folded, the lower pair resting on the pommel of a ceremonial blade longer than Kael was tall. Compound eyes reflected starlight like shattered mirrors. Behind him stood a dozen high-caste Veyra, scientists, priests, generals, silent as statues. Kael stepped forward. The grav plates hummed beneath his bare feet, trying to decide if he weighed anything at all. Veyra spoke first, voice deep enough that Kael felt it in his bones even through the translator bead behind his ear. "You are the Terran who mended the breath of stars." The processor had already been renamed. "Typical. I fixed a machine," Kael answered. "It was dying. Machines do that when you beat them instead of listening to them." A ripple of mandibles, Veyra laughter, sharp as breaking glass. One of the priests stepped forward, robes whispering. "The breath of stars has never been restored in under 9 cycles. You did it in 7 hours, with forbidden materials, with no schematic." Kael shrugged. "Schematics are for people who have time." Veyra tilted his head, studying Kael the way a butcher studies meat that has suddenly spoken. "Your species was harvested as labor stock, strong backs, weak minds, yet you stand here unbroken. Explain." Kael felt every eye in the chamber. He thought of Mara's ancient eyes, of the 200 silent humans in the canyon who had watched him walk away. He thought of his mother's voice in the dark, "Fear not, for I am with thee." He met the Primarch's gaze. "Because you made one mistake," he said quietly. "You thought slavery would make us smaller. It only taught us how big we already were." Silence. Then Veyra did something unthinkable. He laughed, not the grinding hiss of his warriors, but a low, rolling sound that held genuine amusement. "You will serve me directly now, Terran, in the Crucible Vaults, the heart of our war foundries. Fail there, and your entire bloodline will be rendered into nutrient paste." Kael's stomach turned, but his voice stayed level. "And if I succeed," the Primarch's mandibles spread wide, "then perhaps I will allow you to keep breathing." They marched him out through corridors of living metal that shifted and sighed like something half asleep. Veyra children, pale, fragile things with too many joints peeked from alcoves, then vanished when the guards hissed. At the Crucible Vaults, the heat hit like a fist. Magma rivers glowed beneath transparent decks. Forge arms the size of skyscrapers hammered starship hulls into being, and everywhere humans, thousands of them chained to assembly rigs, faces lit orange by plasma torches. Some looked up as Kael passed. Recognition flickered, then careful blankness. "You didn't stare long in the vaults. Staring got you noticed." They brought him to Bay 9, a cavernous space where a Veyra dreadnought skeleton hung half-finished, its spine cracked open like a gutted whale. The overseer there was missing an arm, lost, rumor said, to a human who had chosen death over one more lash. The stump still smoked where it had been cauterized. "Your task," the overseer snarled, shoving a data slate at Kael. "The phase lattice will not stabilize. Every test collapses the field. Fix it, or I begin with the children." The slate showed equations that hurt to look at, higher dimensional geometry twisted into weaponized prayer. Kael felt the old rage rise, but he swallowed it. Rage was a luxury. Survival was a discipline. He spent 3 days without sleep. He crawled through maintenance conduits too small for Veyra, fingers tracing power conduits until they bled. He spoke to the human welders in the old arc camp, hand signs and half-remembered Bible verses that meant "I see you. You are not forgotten." On the 4th night, alone inside the dreadnought's spine, he found the flaw, a harmonic resonance the Veyra had dismissed as Terran superstition. They had tuned the lattice to their own biology, 8-limbed, exoskeletal, cold-blooded. Humans felt the universe differently, bone and warm blood and stubborn rhythm. Kael rewrote the phase harmonics to the cadence of a heartbeat. He keyed the test sequence with shaking hands. The lattice ignited, not the angry red of Veyra weapons, but a steady, impossible gold. The dreadnought's spine flexed, alive for the first time, and the entire bay fell silent. Even the overseer's stump stopped smoking. Kael climbed down from the scaffold, legs trembling with exhaustion. The humans around him didn't cheer. They did something worse. They knelt, one by one like a wave, until the entire bay was on its knees before him, not in submission, in gratitude, in recognition. The overseer's remaining claw clenched around his whip, but he didn't raise it. Something in the air had shifted, something older than fear. Kael looked at the kneeling thousands and felt terror coil cold around his heart. This was how legends began, and legends, he knew, were the most dangerous chains of all. Far above, in the observatory dome, Primarch Veyra watched the golden lattice bloom on his holoscreen. For a long moment he was motionless. Then very softly he spoke a word in the ancient Veyra tongue that had not been used in 10,000 years, a word that meant divine. Down in Bay 9, Kael closed his eyes and felt the weight of every gaze upon him. He whispered the only prayer he could still remember, "Not me, Lord, them, save them." But somewhere in the dark between heartbeats, something vast and quiet answered, "I already am." And in the crucible vaults that night, the first Veyra overseer lowered his whip and did not raise it again. The whispers began the next dawn. At first they were careful, carried on the breath of exhausted humans moving between shifts. Kael Dane walked inside the dreadnought's heart and made it beat like a man. Kael Dane looked at the lattice and it turned gold. Kael Dane prayed and the machine listened. By the third day the whispers had crossed species. A Veyra Forge priest was seen tracing the sign of a circle over cross, an old human symbol for Earth, onto the housing of a plasma coil before ignition. When asked why, he hissed, "Because the Terran's god lives in the harmonics." Kael heard none of it. They had moved him to the Primarch's personal laboratories, a sterile white sphere suspended inside a magnetic bottle high above the spires. No chains here, only silence and the constant pressure of being watched by eyes that no longer knew what they were looking at. He worked alone. On the fourth week they brought him the Crown Project, a neural crown forged from living crystal, designed to link a Veyra commander directly to an entire battle fleet, mind as weapon, will as blade. Every test subject had died in screaming agony within minutes, their carapaces cracked from the inside by feedback no Veyra mind could tame. Vihalzakit's voice came through the intercom, calm as winter. "Make it obey, Terran, or I will flood the children's barracks with nerve gas and let you listen." Kael stared at the crown resting on its pedestal like a frozen scream. He had not slept in 4 days. His reflection in the polished floor looked like a ghost wearing his face. He thought of Mara's small hand pressing the canteen into his palm. He thought of the thousands kneeling in Bay 9. He thought of his mother's voice. "Greater love hath no man than this." Kael sat cross-legged on the cold floor, the way children on the Ark had sat for evening prayer, and placed the crown on his own head. Alarm shrieked. Red strobes painted the sphere like fresh blood. The crystal ignited, tendrils of light burrowing into his skull like burning roots. He felt the fleet 400 dreadnoughts, a million minds, the cold hunger of Veyra war doctrine trying to pour itself into the small, warm space behind his eyes. Pain beyond sound, his vision whited out. He tasted copper and childhood, then something else stirred, not power, presence, a stillness deeper than the void between stars, the same quiet that had answered him in the dreadnought's spine. It did not speak, it simply refused to move aside. Kael felt the fleet's collective mind crash against that stillness like waves against a cliff that had stood since creation. And where it broke, something new formed, a rhythm older than empires, a heartbeat, his heartbeat. The crown went quiet. The light shifted from white to the same impossible gold as the dreadnought lattice. Kael opened his eyes. Across the sphere, every holoscreen showed the same image, 400 dreadnoughts hanging in orbit, their running lights pulsing in perfect synchrony with his own pulse. He took the crown off. The fleet stayed synced. Somewhere in the distance, Vihalzakit made a sound no translator could render. They did not return Kael to the labs after that. They gave him quarters inside the Primarch's own spire, a circular room with a transparent wall facing the night sky, a soft bed, real food, no guards at the door, because guards were no longer required. The Veyra began leaving offerings outside his door. First, a single plasma coil etched with human script. Then a bowl of water and a cloth, symbols of purification in Veyra death rites. Then an egg, rare, sacred, the promise of future warriors. Kael carried each gift inside, placed it on the small table, and stared at them until dawn. He did not want to be worshipped. He wanted the children free. He wanted the chains gone. He wanted to go home to a planet he had never seen. But every morning the offerings grew. On the 42nd night, the door opened without sound. A Veyra child no taller than Mara stood there, pale and trembling, clutching something wrapped in silk. Behind her in the corridor, a dozen adult warriors knelt, heads bowed. The child stepped forward and unwrapped the silk. Inside lay a single shard of the living crystal from the Crown Project, shaped into a perfect circle over cross. She placed it in Kael's hand and whispered in halting Terran, taught in secret, for the voice of the golden beat. Then she touched her forehead to the floor and fled. Kael stood in the doorway holding the shard, its edges warm as skin. He looked out at the kneeling warriors, proud, undefeated children of 1,000 conquests, and felt something break inside his chest. Not pride, not triumph, grief, because he understood now they were not worshipping him. They were worshipping what they had glimpsed through him, something larger than species, something that had looked at their empire of fear and simply refused to be afraid. Kael closed the door. He knelt not like a slave, but like his mother had taught him, and pressed his forehead to the cool floor. For the first time since childhood, he cried, not for the chains on human wrists, but for the chains that had just been forged around his own soul. Outside, the twin moons rose full and bright, washing the spire's silver. And across the colony, in labor canyons and children's barracks, humans began to wake from uneasy sleep with the same dream. A man standing in golden fire, arms spread wide, saying without words, "The time is coming. hold fast. In the Primarch's war room, Vihalzakit stared at orbital scans showing every dreadnought in the fleet now bore a small hand-painted symbol on its prow, circle over cross, in human gold. He did not order them removed. Instead, very quietly, he asked his high priest a question that had never been asked in 10,000 years of Veyra dominion. What do we do when the gods turn out to be real, and they bleed like men? Far below, in the dark between heartbeats, the quiet presence waited, patient, merciful, inevitable. And somewhere in the spire, Kael Dane slept at last, the crystal pendant warm against his chest, dreaming of blue oceans he had never seen, and a voice older than stars whispering a single promise. Soon, the night of 3 moons arrived like judgment. Every 240 years, the moons of Ruktur aligned, dragging tides of molten iron beneath the crust and thinning the veil between gravity and grace. The Veyra called it the Night of Breaking. Their priests fasted, their warriors danced with blades, and every conquered species was reminded who held the chains. This year the festival would be different. Kael woke before the chimes, the crystal pendant pulsing warm against his skin like a second heart. The room was dark except for the moon's silver pouring through the transparent wall. He rose, barefoot on cold stone, and looked out over the colony. The labor canyons were empty. Every human had been summoned to the grand amphitheater carved into the side of Mount Verkith, an arena that could hold 500,000 souls. The official reason, to witness the Primarch's triumph, the unveiling of the crown fleet under Veyra command. The real reason, to break them completely by forcing them to watch their miracle worker kneel. Kael dressed in the plain gray jumpsuit they had left for him. No chains, no finery, just cloth and the weight of what was coming. The door opened on its own. No guards waited. Instead, a single Veyra priest stood there, old and scarred, his carapace painted with ash in the pattern of mourning. He bowed, not the shallow tilt of superiority, but deep from the waist until his mandibles nearly touched the floor. The voice of the Golden Beat is asked to walk the processional alone, the priest said, voice trembling. The warriors will not block the way. Kael felt the hush of history leaning in. He stepped past the priest and into the corridor. The spires were deserted. Every Veyra, from hatchling to elder, had gone ahead to the amphitheater. The silence rang louder than any crowd. His footsteps echoed as he descended through bridges of living metal that flexed beneath him like breathing things. Halfway down, he passed a wall of windows overlooking the forges. The great hammers stood still. The magma rivers glowed quiet. Someone had shut the entire industrial heart of the colony down for the first time in 2 centuries. So the whole world could watch what happened next. Kael kept walking. The processional path wound down the mountain in switchbacks of black glass. At every turn stood statues of past Primarchs, taller than buildings, blades raised in eternal conquest. Their shadows stretched long in the triple moonlight. At the final turn, Kael stopped. The amphitheater yawned below him, a perfect circle sunk into the bones of the planet. Tiered seats rose 200 levels high, filled with Veyra in ceremonial armor that caught the moons like spilled mercury. At the center, on a dais of obsidian, stood Vihalzakit in full battle regalia, the living crystal crown resting on his brow like frozen fire. And surrounding the dais in chained ranks that broke the heart to see, every human on Ruktur, 200,000, men, women, children, barefoot on burning stone. Guards ringed them with neural whips raised. Kael started down the final slope. The moment his foot touched the arena floor, silence fell so complete he heard his own pulse. He walked the long white path alone, past rows of Veyra who did not hiss, did not threaten. Many had removed their helmets. Their compound eyes reflected the moons and something else, something that looked almost like hope. When he reached the edge of the human ranks, the chains fell away, not cut, not unlocked. They simply opened and dropped to the sand like dead snakes. Every shackle in the arena, at once, a collective gasp rippled through the humans. Children cried out. Adults reached for each other with hands that had forgotten how to be free. Kael did not stop. He kept walking until he stood 10 paces from the Primarch. Vihalzakit raised one clawed hand. The gesture was slow, almost reluctant. Kael Dane of Terra, his voice rolled out across the amphitheater, amplified by the stone itself. You stand accused of sedition against the eternal dominion. Of sorcery, of blasphemy against the Veyra ascendancy. The words should have thundered. Instead, they sounded tired. Kael looked up at the tiers of warriors, at the humans now standing unshackled behind him, at the 3 moons burning overhead like watchful eyes. He spoke, and his voice, unamplified, somehow carried to the highest seat. I'm guilty of none of those things, he said. I'm guilty of fixing what you broke, of refusing to let my people die just to prove you're stronger. And of believing that even conquerors can be saved. A murmur swept the Veyra ranks, shock, rage, wonder. Vihalzakit's claws tightened on the crown. Then kneel, Terran, kneel and swear fealty, and your species will be elevated to protected caste. Refuse, he gestured to the humans, and they all die with you here tonight. Kael felt 200,000 hearts stop behind him. He looked at the children clinging to their parents' legs, at old men whose backs had carried Veyra ore for decades. At Mara standing in the front row, her small face fierce with tears she refused to let fall. Then he looked back at the Primarch and smiled, not the smile of a slave, not even the smile of a man, the smile of someone who had already seen the ending. No, Kael said simply. The arena held its breath. Vhalzakit's mandibles parted in fury. He raised the crown, crystal blazing white, and the fleet answered. Every dreadnought in orbit ignited its main weapons at once. 400 lance batteries locked onto the planet, targeting coordinates that formed a perfect circle around the amphitheater. The Primarch froze, because the targeting locks were not Veyra protocols. They were human. Kael spoke again, softer now, but the stone carried it anyway. You wanted a god you could control, he said, but the one who made the stars doesn't wear crowns men forge. He lifted the small crystal pendant from beneath his jumpsuit, the child's gift, and held it up to the moonlight. The pendant flared gold. Every holoscreen in the arena, every personal comm, every retinal implant the Veyra wore, filled with the same image. The dreadnought prows, each painted with the circle over cross, now turning as one slowly, deliberately to face the Primarch's palace spires. Not in attack, in witness. Kael looked at Vhalzakit and spoke the sentence that would echo through 1,000 years of Veyra scripture. Your empire ends tonight, not because we rose up, but because you finally looked up and saw something bigger than yourselves. The Primarch's claw trembled on the crown, and in that moment, across the entire arena, 10,000 Veyra warriors did the unthinkable. They knelt, not to Kael, to the man who had refused to kneel to them. The sound of armored bodies hitting stone rolled like thunder under the three moons. Kael closed his eyes. He felt the quiet presence settle over the arena like morning mist, gentle, undeniable, older than sorrow. And for the first time in 250 years, humans on an alien world stood free beneath alien stars, while their former masters bowed their heads in the dust. But Kael knew this was not the end. It was only the moment the chains changed direction. High above, the dreadnoughts held their fire, waiting for a single word. And somewhere in the silence between heartbeats, the real war, the one for souls, had only just begun. They tried to enslave the humans, and ended up worshipping them. Part 6 of 9. Dawn came slow and bruised over Mount Verkith. The color of old wine spilled across the sky. The amphitheater was no longer an arena. It was a city of the sleepless. Humans and Veyra moved among one another like survivors of a shared shipwreck, unsure whether to embrace or flinch. Fires burned in scattered circles, some for warmth, some for cooking the first free meal anyone could remember. Children of both species chased each other between the legs of exhausted warriors, laughter sounding almost obscene after centuries of silence. Kael had not slept. He stood on the obsidian dais where Vhalzakit had knelt, watching the new world try to be born. His gray jumpsuit was torn and streaked with soot and someone else's blood. The crystal pendant hung heavy against his sternum, no longer glowing, just warm, like a living thing that had decided to rest. Mara slept curled against his boots, one small fist still clutching the sleeve of his shirt as if he might vanish if she let go. Vhalzakit approached through the smoke, moving carefully like a man walking across thin ice. The the former Primarch, had removed his armor. He wore only a simple black kilt of mourning cloth. The stump of Kreshvar's severed arm had been cauterized and wrapped. The plasma blade lay sheathed at his side, its power cell ejected and crushed beneath his heel hours earlier. He stopped 3 paces away and waited. Kael looked at him for a long time. You saved my life, he said finally. I saved something larger than your life, Vhalzakit answered, voice rough from shouting orders that no longer existed. I am learning the difference. Kael exhaled, a sound almost like laughter. We both are. The former Primarch's mandibles worked, searching for words in a language built for conquest. I have dissolved the Dominion. The fleet is yours to command. The forges stand idle until your people decide their purpose. He hesitated, the proud head bowing slightly. I do not know what I am now. Kael studied the alien who had once owned the sky. You're the first Veyra in history to choose mercy over victory. That makes you something new, and new things get to choose their own names. Vhalzakit was quiet for a long moment, then very softly, your god, does he accept late repentance? The question hung between them like incense. Kael felt the old reflex rise, the arc preacher's answer, the easy verse, the comforting lie. He crushed it. I don't know, he said honestly, but he waited 250 years for humans to stop hating each other long enough to pray again. I figure he's patient. The Veyra's compound eyes shimmered, whether from dust or something else, Kael couldn't tell. Below the dais, a commotion rippled through the crowd. A human woman, gray-haired, back bent from decades in the ore processors, was trying to give her water ration to a Veyra warrior whose thorax had been crushed by falling debris during the night. The warrior kept refusing, claws trembling. Finally, the woman simply pressed the canteen into his upper hand and closed his claws around it herself. The warrior drank, 1 sip, 2, then bowed his head until his mandibles touched the sand. Around them, others watched in stunned silence. Kael felt tears threaten again. He was so tired of crying. Vhalzakit saw it. Your people teach mine how to receive kindness. Mine must now teach yours how to give it without breaking. Kael laughed then, a cracked sound. We'll muddle through. Humans are good at muddling. A shout from the eastern gate cut the moment short. Riders on anti-grav skiffs, human teenagers who had hot-wired Veyra patrol craft, came screaming into the amphitheater, faces pale. Ships, they yelled. More ships. Coming out of the dark between the moons, every spine straightened. Old reflexes died hard. Kael climbed to the highest tier, Veyra hit beside him. The former Primarch raised a claw, and a holoscreen blossomed above the arena, orbital feed from the dreadnought still loyal to the golden heartbeat. 3 vessels hung against the starfield, sleek and black, bearing the sigil of the Veyra Greater Conclave, the old Empire's ruling council, stationed 3 systems away. They had come to investigate why Rukter had gone silent. Their lead ship hailed on open channel, voice cold and ancient. Primarch Veyra, you will surrender the Terran sorcerer and resume control of this colony, or we will reduce it to slag. You have 1 hour. The message repeated in Veyra High Cant, then in broken Terran, as if the speaker enjoyed the taste of fear. Silence fell over 500,000 souls. Kael felt the fragile thing they had built last night begin to crack. Veyra stared at the screen, mandibles tight. They will not accept what happened here, he said quietly. They will burn this world to prove the old way still works. Kael looked out at the sea of faces, human and Veyra, waiting for him to decide whether the night had been a beginning or just a beautiful lie. He felt Mara stir at his feet, waking, rubbing her eyes. 1 hour. He closed his fist around the crystal pendant until its edges cut his palm. We give them something the old way never prepared them for, he said. Veyra turned, compound eyes narrowing. Which is, Kael smiled, tired and terrible and unafraid. An answer they can't fight. He climbed onto the highest broken statue, an old Primarch with its blade arm shattered, and raised his blood-slick hand. Every dreadnought in orbit snapped to attention, their golden prows turning toward the incoming conclave ships like flowers following the sun. Kael opened the all-fleet channel himself. No codes, no protocol, just a human voice, raw and exhausted and alive. This is Kael Dane of Terra, he said, and every speaker in the colony, every comm bead, every helmet carried his words into the dawn. You came expecting slaves and a Primarch. You'll find neither. You'll find free people, human and Veyra, who chose something better than chains. Come in peace and you're welcome. Come in war and you'll learn why the universe itself is changing its mind about who gets to write the future. He paused, looked at Veyra, and added the sentence that would be carved into stone on 100 worlds. We're done kneeling, to anyone. Then he cut the channel. For 1 heartbeat the amphitheater was perfectly still. Then a roar went up, not human, not Veyra, but something new. Fists and claws punched the sky. Children screamed joy they didn't understand yet. Old enemies embraced like brothers who had finally remembered the same mother. Veyra stared at Kael as if seeing him for the first time. You just declared war on the Conclave with 400 ships and a prayer. Kael stepped down from the statue, swaying with exhaustion. No, he said softly. I just invited them to salvation. Whether they accept is up to them. Mara slipped her small hand into his. Are we going to die, Kael? He knelt, pressed his forehead to hers. Maybe, he whispered, but not tonight and not alone. Above them, the Conclave ships began to move, accelerating, weapons charging. 58 minutes left. Kael looked at the dawn, at the 2 species standing together beneath it, and felt the quiet presence settle over the arena like a hand on a fevered brow. He breathed in the scent of smoke and breakfast fires and impossible hope. Then he turned to Veyra and offered his bleeding hand. Help me build something they can't bomb out of existence in an hour, he said. The former Primarch stared at the offered hand, scarred, human, unafraid. Then he took it with his own upper claw, grip careful, reverent. Teach me, he said. And in the shadow of incoming death, the strangest army in history began to form not of weapons, but of witnesses. Because some things, Kael understood at last, could only be defended by becoming undeniable. The Conclave ships closed the distance, lances glowing white. And on the ground, 500,000 souls, human and Veyra, linked arms across the sand and began to sing. Old songs, new songs, songs without words. The sound rose into the burning sky like an answer no weapon had ever been built to silence. 43 minutes to planetary bombardment. The song had no name. It began with one old human woman, voice cracked from years of dust and screaming, humming a lullaby her mother had sung on the Ark. A Veyra warrior beside her picked up the low drone of his people's morning chant. The 2 melodies should never have fit together. They braided like vines that had been waiting centuries to touch. Within minutes, the entire amphitheater thundered with it, 200,000 human throats and 300,000 Veyra-thorax resonators weaving a chord that made the air itself tremble. Children stood on warriors' shoulders. Former slaves and former masters locked arms so tightly that claws drew blood from human skin and human fingernails carved crescents into chitin. No one let go. High above, the dreadnoughts held formation, golden prows blazing like cathedral windows. Their lance batteries stayed cold. Kael had ordered them not to fire first. He stood at the center of the dais with Veyra on his left and Mara on his right, her small hand swallowed inside his. The crystal pendant at his chest pulsed in perfect rhythm with the song, slow, steady, unbreakable. 29 minutes. The Conclave fleet dropped out of FTL in a triangle of black knives, each ship a mile long, shields shimmering with contempt. They did not hail again. They simply locked weapons on every major population center and began the targeting chant of the Pure Blade Cast, an ancient liturgy that ended with glassed worlds. 15 minutes. Inside the amphitheater, the song reached its crescendo, not louder, deeper. It sank into the stone, into the bones of the mountain, into the magma rivers far below. The ground itself began to hum. Kael closed his eyes. He had no plan left, no clever harmonic trick, no hidden fleet. Only this, 500,000 souls refusing to hate each other while death fell from the sky. He felt the quiet presence gather the way storm clouds gather, silent, vast, patient, not angry, not triumphant. Simply present. 10 minutes. The lead conclave ship, the Eternal Verdict, opened its main lance. White fire gathered in its throat like the wrath of dead gods. 5 minutes. Kael opened his eyes and looked straight up into the orbital feed projected above the arena. He spoke not to the fleet, not to his people, but to the sky itself. His voice was soft, almost conversational, yet every speaker carried it into vacuum. "You keep looking for gods you can kill," he said. "But the one we serve doesn't live in temples or thrones. He lives in the space between a claw and a hand that chooses not to strike. You're aiming at the wrong target." He lifted Mara into his arms. She wrapped her legs around his waist like she had when she was 4 and the world was only darkness and stories. "Watch," he whispered to her. "Watch what love does when it's finished being afraid." 3 minutes. The Eternal Verdict fired. A lance of pure white plasma thick enough to vaporize mountains leapt across the void toward Rukter, toward the amphitheater, toward children holding claws, toward a song that had never existed before this morning. Every soul on the ground saw it coming. No one ran. The beam crossed half the distance in heartbeats, and then without drama, without sound, it simply stopped. Not deflected, not absorbed, stopped. As if light itself had looked at what was waiting below and decided it had better places to be. The lance hung in space, a frozen river of sunfire 30,000 kilometers long, motionless, harmless, beautiful. In the silence that followed, the Conclave fleet's shields flickered, then failed, not from damage, from wonder. Every targeting system went blind. Every weapon safetied itself. Every bridge officer stared at their screens and saw the same impossible image reflected in their compound eyes. 500,000 souls on a planet they had come to punish, standing together, singing. The Eternal Verdict's lance began to dim, bleeding light into the void like a snuffed candle. On the bridge of the Conclave flagship, High Arbiter Tarkesh, ancient, merciless architect of 100 genocides, felt his claws go slack on the command throne. He had killed worlds for less than this defiance. Yet something older than duty stirred in the hollow where his soul should have been. He opened a channel, not the formal one, but the emergency band used only when a Primarch fell in battle. His voice, when it came, was small. "What are you?" Kael heard it across every speaker in the colony. He shifted Mara higher in his arms and answered. "We're what happens when you push a species so far into the dark that the only thing left to reach for is each other. We're the answer your empire never had a question for." A long silence. Then Tarkesh did something no recording in Veyra history had ever documented. He powered down his weapons. All 3 ships followed suit, shields dropping, engines idling. The frozen lance dissolved into glittering dust that caught the sunlight and rained across the upper atmosphere like golden snow. On the ground, the song ended, not because it was finished, because it no longer needed words. Kael set Mara down. She stared up at the sky, mouth open, as the first flakes of weaponized mercy drifted onto her tongue. Veyra stood beside Kael, trembling. "They surrendered," he whispered, "without a shot." "No," Kael said quietly. "They woke up." He climbed the broken statue again, blood and sweat cutting channels through the dust on his face. He raised both arms to the sky that had almost killed them. "People of the Conclave," he shouted, voice cracking with exhaustion and joy. "You came to bury a miracle. Instead, you get to join it. Land your ships, walk among us, see what happens when chains are traded for names." He paused, chest heaving. "Or leave. The choice is yours. It always was." For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the Eternal Verdict began to descend, slowly, carefully, like a predator learning how to bow. Across the colony, humans and Veyra watched the black ship sink through the golden snow, engines dimmed to funeral pace. Mara tugged Kael's sleeve. "Are they coming to hurt us?" Kael knelt, cupped her face in both hands. "They're coming to meet the thing that scared them more than dying," he said. "Forgiveness." She considered this, then nodded solemnly and turned to watch the ships land. The first ramp opened on the plain outside the amphitheater. High Arbiter Tarkesh stepped out alone, no honor guard, no weapons. His robes of office dragged in the dust as he walked the long road toward the dais. Halfway there he stopped, looked at the linked arms of human and Veyra lining the path, and did what Veyra had done hours earlier. He knelt, not in defeat, in apprenticeship. Kael felt the tears come again, hot and endless. He looked at the sky, now full of ships descending like dark angels seeking absolution, and spoke the only prayer left in him. "Thank you," he whispered to the quiet presence that had never left, "for using broken people to mend the universe one heart at a time." and high above, where no sensor could reach, the golden snow kept falling, silent, endless, merciful. The war was over. The Covenant had just begun. But somewhere far beyond the edge of the system, something older than the Veyra conclave stirred in the dark between stars. It had watched the light refuse to kill. It did not understand, and it was coming to learn. The golden snow fell for 3 days. Ships of the former conclave settled on every plain, every canyon floor, every cracked landing field the colony possessed. Ramps opened like petals. Warriors who had never bent their necks to anything stepped onto alien soil unarmed, eyes wide, claws folded tight against their chests so they would not accidentally threaten. Humans met them with bread and water, with children who offered clumsy hugs, with old men who simply stood in silence and let the Veyra see the scars on their backs. No speeches, no trials, only witness. Kael walked among them until his legs gave out. He shook claws that had once held whips. He carried Veyra young on his shoulders when their legs tired. He sat with High Arbiter Tarkesh under the shade of a broken dreadnought wing and listened to the ancient warrior speak of the worlds he had burned and the nightmares that followed him across light years. "I thought emptiness was strength," Tarkesh rasped, voice like gravel in a tomb. "Your people have shown me emptiness is only the space mercy fills when it finally arrives." Kael had no answer except to place his hand over the Arbiter's trembling claw and hold it until the shaking stopped. On the 4th day, they began dismantling the labor canyons. Humans and Veyra worked side by side, tearing down the black spires that had once floated above the pits like gods of punishment. The metal was melted and recast into homes, into irrigation pipes, into cradles for children who would never know the weight of a chain. Kael watched from a ridge at dusk, Mara asleep against his side, when Vihalzekit found him. The former Primarch carried 2 cups of something steaming real coffee, smuggled from a conclave holed by a repentant quartermaster. They drank in silence, watching the last spire fall in a bloom of orange fire and rising sparks. "I have lived 943 cycles," Vihalzekit said at last. "I have seen stars die. I have never seen anything born before this week." Kael tasted the coffee, bitter, perfect, human, and felt the ache of every muscle, every unslept hour, every tear he had swallowed. "I keep waiting to wake up," he said, "or for someone to tell me the cost." Vihalzekit's mandibles clicked softly, almost a laugh. "The cost is tomorrow, and every tomorrow after. Freedom is not the absence of chains, Kael Dane. It is the presence of choice, and choice is heavier than any shackle we ever forged." Kael closed his eyes. "Then we'll carry it together." They stood until the stars came out, until the fires below burned low and the sound of hammers became lullabies. But peace, like metal, has flaws if you know where to look. On the 7th night, the sky tore open. No warning, no hyperspace signature. A rift the width of a moon yawned above Rukter, blacker than space, edged with colors that hurt to perceive. From its heart poured ships that were not ships, living geometries of obsidian and hunger, older than the Veyra, older than language. The Void Choir, the Conclave's deepest terror, entities that fed on order, on stories, on the concept of meaning itself. They had sensed the impossible, a world where conqueror and conquered had chosen covenant over annihilation. Such a thing was not allowed. The choir's voice rolled across every mind on the planet at once, not words, but the memory of screaming universes. Return to the pattern. Love is a malfunction. Erase. Every human in Veyra dropped to their knees, clutching skulls as blood leaked from ears and eyes. The golden snow flash froze mid-air and shattered into black dust. Kael fell beside Mara, vision tunneling, the crystal pendant burning cold against his skin. The dreadnoughts in orbit fired instinctively, lances, missiles, raw plasma. The weapons crossed the distance and simply ceased to exist, devoured by the choir's hunger. Vihalzekit crawled to Kael through the agony, claws scraping stone. "They are what we were running from," he gasped. "Before the Dominion, before names, they unmake what dares to become more than prey." Kael tasted iron. He forced his eyes open and saw the choir descending, tides of living absence, erasing stars as they came. He looked for the quiet presence that had walked with him through fire and mercy and impossible mornings. It was silent. For the first time since the dreadnought's heart had turned gold, Kael felt truly alone. Mara's small hand found his in the dark. She was crying blood, but her grip was fierce. "Don't let go," she whispered. Something inside Kael, something older than fear, older than hope, stirred. He remembered the lance that had refused to fall. He remembered claws that chose not to strike. He remembered a Primarch kneeling in the dust and a little girl offering water to the enemy. He remembered that the universe had once been spoken into being by a word that was not violence. Kael forced himself to his knees. The choir's shadow covered the world. He lifted the crystal pendant, now black as the rift, and pressed it to his lips. Then he did the only thing left. He sang, not the victory song, not the morning chant. The lullaby the old woman had started 7 days ago, the one that had braided 2 species together. His voice was broken, thin, human, but Mara joined him. Then Vihalzekit's deep drone. Then Tarkesh, crawling across the ridge on shattered legs. One by one, across the dying planet, voices rose, human, Veyra, children, ancients. Blood on their lips, tears freezing on their cheeks, they sang the song that should never have existed. The the choir recoiled. The rift wavered, because the song was not sound, it was memory, it was choice. It was the stubborn refusal of created things to return to silence. Kael stood, swaying, and opened his arms to the devouring dark. "You want the pattern," he shouted into the void, voice raw but unafraid. Here it is, a human child holds a Veyra claw and calls it brother. A conqueror kneels and calls it salvation. That is the shape reality takes when love wins. Come and try to unmake it. The choir screamed a sound that shattered moons. The rift lunged, and the quiet presence finally answered. Not with thunder, not with angels or armies. With light, simple, warm, golden light, the same light that had lived in a dreadnought's heart, in a little girl's eyes, in every act of mercy since the night of 3 moons. It poured from the crystal pendant, from every linked hand, from every throat still singing. It met the choir's darkness like dawn meeting night, not fighting, simply being. Where they touched, the darkness remembered it had once been part of the light. The choir unraveled, not destroyed, undone. Thread by thread, the entities that had devoured galaxies dissolved into the same golden snow that had fallen when mercy first arrived. They did not die. They became something else, something that had forgotten how to hunger. The rift closed with a sigh older than time. Silence returned, soft as forgiveness. Kael fell to his knees in the new snow, warm now, smelling of rain and distant oceans. Mara buried her face in his neck and sobbed. Vihalzekit placed one careful claw on Kael's shoulder. Tarkesh bowed his ancient head until it touched the ground. Above them, the stars, all the stars the choir had erased, blinked back into existence one by one, as if the universe itself had been holding its breath. Kael looked up through tears and laughed. The sound cracked, astonished, free, because the quiet presence had never left. It had simply waited for them to become the answer themselves. And somewhere in the golden snow, now drifting across a healed world, the last echo of the choir whispered a single, wondering question before it, too, became light. What manner of creatures are these that sing darkness back into dawn? Years later, travelers coming to Rukter would swear the planet itself had changed color. Where once the surface was rust and black glass, now there were oceans, shallow, warm, the exact blue of old Earth photographs no one had seen in living memory. Forests of silver green climbed the former labor canyons. The twin suns rose over fields where human and Veyra children chased each other through crops that grew from seeds carried across centuries in a mother's locket. The dreadnoughts still hung in orbit, but their hulls were painted white and gold, their lance ports sealed forever. They had become Arcs again, carrying teachers, doctors, storytellers, to every world the old Dominion once terrorized. At the heart of the capital, a city built where the grand amphitheater once stood, rose a single spire of living crystal, not a monument to victory, a library. Every wall was a page, every facet a memory. The night of 3 moons, the frozen lance, the song that turned devourers into snow. Children of both species touched the walls and felt the stories pour into their minds like gentle rain. Kael Dane never lived in the spire. He built a small house on the edge of the western sea, roofed with salvaged dreadnought plating that still caught the light like a promise. The door was always open. The table always had room. On the evening this story truly ends, the twin suns were setting in a sky so clear it hurt to look at. Kael, gray now at the temples, hands scarred and steady, sat on the porch with Mara, 19, fierce-eyed, studying to be the colony's first doctor. Vihalzekit was there too, his once obsidian carapace faded to soft charcoal with age, telling stories to a circle of hatchlings and human toddlers who fought sleep just to hear one more. Tarkesh had died the year before, peacefully, in a garden he had planted himself. His last words, whispered to Kael, had been simple. "I finally understand the joke. Mercy was always stronger. We were just too proud to laugh." The children eventually succumbed, carried off to beds by parents who still sometimes woke reaching for chains that were no longer there. Only 3 remained on the porch as the first stars appeared. Mara leaned against Kael's shoulder. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked quietly. The fight, Kael considered the horizon where the sea met the sky in a line of liquid fire. "Every day," he said, "and never again." Vihalzekit clicked softly, the sound that had replaced laughter. "You gave us a story bigger than conquest, Kael Dane. The young ones think peace is normal now. That is the most terrifying thing you ever did to us." Kael smiled, tired and content. "Good." Silence settled, companionable, vast. Then Mara pointed upward. A new star, brighter than any in the sky, was moving against the pattern of constellations. Not a ship, something else. Kael felt the old prickle at the base of his skull, the same one that had warned him of bombs and void choirs. But this carried no threat, only curiosity. The light grew until it resolved into a shape, a perfect circle over cross of pure golden radiance, large enough to eclipse a moon. It hung above the ocean, silent, patient. Every soul on the planet felt it at once human. Veyra, the trees themselves seemed to lean toward it. Mara's breath caught. "Kael, is that?" He stood slowly, heart hammering with something between terror and recognition. The light pulsed once, gentle, questioning. Kael stepped off the porch onto the sand. The tide lapped at his bare feet like it remembered him. He looked at the radiance that contained all the mercy he had ever been too small to carry and suddenly understood. It had never been about him. It had never been about humans or Veyra or empires or songs. It had always been about the space between one heart and another, the place where fear became courage, where hatred learned the shape of forgiveness. He had only been the first to stand in that space and refused to move. The light brightened, warm as a hand on a shoulder. Kael lifted his own hand, scarred, trembling, human, toward it. "Thank you," he whispered, voice breaking, "for letting us be part of the answer." The radiance flared, not blinding, welcoming, and every person on Ruktor, in their beds, in their fields, in their ships among the stars, heard the same quiet voice, not in their ears, but in the place where hope is born. "Well done." Then the light folded itself into the stars it had come from, leaving the night brighter than before. Kael stood on the shore until dawn, tears cutting clean paths down cheeks that had forgotten how to cry. When the suns rose, the circle overcross was gone, but no one who had seen it ever looked at another person, human, Veyra, or stranger yet to come, the same way again. Because they knew in the marrow of their bones what the universe had learned on a small red planet under twin suns: chains can conquer worlds, only love can remake them. And somewhere in the quiet between heartbeats, the one who spoke everything into being smiled the way a father smiles when his children finally understand the family resemblance. Kael Dane died 17 years later, on an ordinary spring morning, sitting on that same porch with Mara's firstborn asleep in his lap. They buried him beneath a tree whose leaves were the exact gold of the light that had once refused to fall. On the stone they carved no titles, no dates, only 7 words. He fixed what was broken with unbroken hands. Travelers still come to read them. They leave changed, because the story is not finished. It never will be. Every time a hand reaches across an ancient hatred, every time a claw opens instead of closes, every time someone chooses the harder thing, mercy over vengeance, covenant over chains, Kael Dane's heartbeat, steady and golden, echoes in the dark between stars, and somewhere the quiet presence listens and is pleased.